Welcome to Soul Fire Leadership. This channel is about restoring your sense of self and leadership, especially when success starts costing more than it should. I want to start somewhere uncomfortable today. You're always on because at some point you realized you didn't get the same margin for error. No one pulled you aside and trained you, or maybe they did. More likely, you trained yourself, and you trained yourself well, and you built your leadership style around it. That's different than being driven. That's adaptive. And adaptation, when it runs long enough, starts to feel like personality. And that's what I want to untangle today. You didn't wake up one day and decide to constantly monitor yourself. Instead, you noticed which women were labeled emotional. You noticed who got described as too much. You noticed how quickly tone could be misread. You saw how quickly confidence could be reframed as aggression. You watched decisiveness get called cold. You saw how emotion could become evidence. So you refined and adjusted. You learned to steady your voice even when you were uncertain, so it wouldn't trigger a reaction. You learned to soften disagreements so they landed as collaborative rather than combative. You learned to make strong decisions without sounding hard. You slowed your speech slightly. You removed the sharpest sentence. You added context before someone could misread you. You made your intelligence digestible, not smaller, digestible. That's different. That wasn't insecurity. That was pattern recognition. You adapted to the room. And because you're intelligent and perceptive, you adapted extremely well. You rose. You were trusted. You became the one people leaned on. But here's the hard part. When adaptation becomes identity, you forget you're adapting. When adaptation works, you stop questioning it. It becomes who I am, except it isn't who you are. It's who you had to be in those rooms. Here's where this becomes deeply exposing. Being always on isn't about workload, it's about vigilance. You don't just lead the conversation, you track yourself inside it. You hear your tone while you're speaking. You adjust mid sentence. You anticipate reactions before they're visible. You can feel when someone stiffens slightly. You register it. You recalibrate. Not because you're insecure, but because you've learned consequence travels fast. That level of awareness is a skill, but it's also vigilance. And vigilance doesn't shut off easily. That's why a meeting can go objectively well, and afterwards you still feel slightly off kilter or slightly drained or like you need a moment before you can re enter your life. Nothing went wrong, but your body never fully stood down. That's bracing. Here's where this gets honest. Somewhere along the way, becoming the stabilizer became safer than being the spark. Somewhere along the way, you stopped trusting the room to tolerate your unfiltered thinking. So you became the regulator. You became the one who smooths tension, the one who translates intensity, the one who absorbs emotional static so no one else has to. I know this because I did it too. And the room grew dependent on that. You as the reliable one, the calm one. People rely on you to stabilize the energy, to make tension digestible, to prevent escalation. That feels powerful. That feels like authority. But it also means you rarely get to regulate. You don't get to be messy or uncertain or sharp for a minute. You don't get to think out loud without polishing it first. And it also means you are carrying a responsibility the system never formally assigned you. You volunteered. And when that runs for years, something subtle happens. You forget what your unfiltered voice feels like. That's the exposure. Let's dismantle the wrong diagnosis. This is not a confidence issue. You're not doubting yourself more. You're carrying more internal management than you used to. You don't need more executive presence training. You need less self surveillance. The exhaustion isn't because you're weak, it's because you've been performing steadiness for rooms that expect it as baseline. When you walk into a room, part of your attention is already allocated to how will this land? Do I need to soften that? Should I clarify preemptively? That dual attention consumes energy. And because you've done it for so long, it feels normal. But normal doesn't mean neutral. The exhaustion isn't from leadership itself, it's from constantly adjusting yourself. And here's the line that might sting: the version of professionalism you've mastered was built for rooms that were never designed to accommodate your full range. So you compressed elegantly, skillfully, successfully. And compression still requires pressure. Now, this doesn't mean swinging into the opposite extreme. It means noticing the brace or the tension in the moment, the slight tightening before you speak, the extra explanation you add automatically, the apology hidden inside a clarification. It means allowing one sentence to land without pre softening it and watching the room. It means letting silence sit instead of filling it, and watching the room adjust instead of adjusting yourself first. Most of the catastrophe you've been preventing never materializes, and that experience begins to retrain your system. You start choosing when to refine instead of refining by reflex. Leadership feels different then. Not louder, not reckless, just less guarded. Because you become less vigilant. And that is a completely different energy. And that's when you realize something important. You were never fragile. You were vigilant. And vigilance is useful in danger, but it's exhausting when it becomes your baseline. If this felt exposing, good. Exposure is not attack, it's clarity. You did not become always on because something is wrong with you. You became that way because you were intelligent enough to read the room early and adapt. The question now is whether that adaptation still fits the level you're operating at. If this resonated, and especially if it made you sit a little straighter, like and subscribe. This channel is for leaders who are ready to lead without constantly bracing for consequence to make leadership work.